Imagine walking to the bus stop on a rainy evening, carrying your child, exhausted from the day, and spotting an elderly couple soaked to the bone, abandoned in the pouring rain. Their faces are etched with fear, confusion, and loneliness. No one is helping them, no one is stopping. And then, without thinking, you step forward. This is exactly what a single mom named Sarah did. With nothing but her heart guiding her, she brought them home, offered them warmth, food, and shelter. But little did she know that one simple act of kindness would change the course of her life forever. The couple she saved had a secret, one that even their own son didn't fully understand. Wealth, power, family legacies, none of it mattered until Sarah stepped in. And the son, the man who abandoned them in their time of need, would soon face the consequences of his actions. What happened in Sarah's tiny apartment over the next 24 hours would test every boundary of love, forgiveness, and human decency. Secrets would be revealed, hearts would break, lessons would be learned, and by the end, no one would leave the apartment unchanged. Would Sarah accept the opportunity the couple offered her? Could the son earn back the trust he shattered? And most importantly, what does it really mean to do the right thing when the world is watching, or when no one is watching at all? Stay tuned, because this is a story about heartbreak, courage, and the extraordinary power of one small act of kindness, one choice that changed lives forever. You won't believe how it ends. Welcome to Brain Fuel, the place where real-life stories shake your heart, spark your mind, and leave you speechless. Every story you watch here is filled with drama, emotion, and lessons that stay with you long after the video ends. So buckle up and let's dive into another unforgettable story. Nobody at that bus stop knew that a single decision, made in the rain, was about to change several lives forever. The sky was dark, the kind of dark that makes streetlights flicker like weak hope, and the rain fell hard, cold, and relentless. Sarah pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself as water soaked through the fabric. Her 5-year-old son, Leo, stood close, his small fingers gripping her hand as thunder rumbled in the distance. They had been waiting for the bus for nearly 40 minutes. Sarah checked the time on her cracked phone screen, her heart sinking. If the bus didn't come soon, they would be late again. Late for home, late for dinner, late for rest. Every day felt like a race she could never win. She had just finished a long shift cleaning offices, her back aching, her feet burning, but she forced a gentle smile for Leo. "Mommy, is it coming?" Leo asked, his voice soft and hopeful. "Soon, baby, very soon," Sarah replied, brushing rain from his hair. That was when she noticed them. At first, they blended into the shadows, two small figures sitting on the far end of the bench, barely moving. But then lightning flashed, and for a brief second, Sarah saw them clearly. An elderly man hunched forward, his hands shaking as he rested them on a worn cane. Beside him sat an elderly woman, her thin coat soaked through, her gray hair plastered to her face by rain. They weren't talking, they weren't checking the road like everyone else. They just sat there, still and silent, as if they had been forgotten by the world. Sarah felt a strange pull in her chest. Her heart was so full of bitterness that she almost laughed out loud. She tried to look away. She told herself it was none of her business. Everyone had problems. Everyone was struggling. She had enough of her own. But then the old woman spoke. "He said he'd be right back," she whispered, barely louder than the rain. The words hit Sarah like a punch. The old man didn't respond. He just stared at the wet road, his eyes dull, empty, waiting. A rushed bus passed without stopping, spraying water near their feet, but they didn't even flinch. Leo noticed them too. "Mommy," he said quietly, tugging her sleeve, "why is that grandma crying?" Sarah swallowed hard. She watched as the old woman wiped her face with shaking hands, trying to hide her tears. No one else at the bus stop seemed to care. People stared at their phones, adjusted their umbrellas, shifted impatiently. Something inside Sarah cracked. She remembered another rainy evening years ago, standing alone, pregnant, watching her husband's car disappear down the street after his final words, "I can't do this anymore." She remembered the silence that followed, the same kind of silence she saw now in the old man's eyes. The rain intensified, drumming loudly on the metal roof of the bus stop. The old woman's shoulders shook as she leaned closer to her husband. "Maybe the bus was late," she said, forcing a weak smile. The old man closed his eyes slowly. "It's been 6 hours," he murmured. Sarah felt her heart pound. 6 hours, in the cold, in the rain, waiting for someone who promised to return. She looked down at Leo. His shoes were wet, his nose was red. She had exactly enough money for groceries and rent this week, not a single extra coin. But Leo slipped his hand free and took a small step toward the couple. "Excuse me," he said shyly, his voice trembling. "Are you cold?" The old woman looked up, startled. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. Sarah's breath caught. She rushed forward and gently pulled Leo back to her side. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quickly. "He just worries." The old woman shook her head. "No, thank you," she said, tears spilling freely now. "No one's talked to us all day." The old man finally turned his head toward Sarah. His voice was rough, tired, worn down by time and disappointment. "Our son brought us here," he said he needed to run an errand, told us to wait. Sarah felt anger rise in her chest. What kind of person leaves their parents like this, in the rain, in the cold? She clenched her fists inside her pockets. "Did he say when he'd come back?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. The old man shook his head slowly. He stopped answering his phone. A long silence followed. The rain seemed louder now. The air felt heavier. Sarah stepped back, torn. She could still walk away. She could still pretend she never noticed them. No one would blame her. Life had taught her to survive, not to save others. But as she turned slightly, she heard the old woman whisper again, almost to herself, "I just want to go home." That was it. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. Home, that simple word carried so much weight. Safety, warmth, belonging, things no one should have to beg for. She took a deep breath, her heart racing. "I don't know what I can do," she said slowly, "but you shouldn't be here like this." The old woman looked up at her, hope flickering weakly in her eyes. For the first time that night, the rain didn't feel quite as cold, and in that moment, standing at a forgotten bus stop, Sarah had no idea that choosing kindness would soon turn her entire life upside down. Sarah stood there for a long moment, frozen between fear and compassion. The rain continued to fall, soaking the pavement, tapping against the shelter roof like a ticking clock. She could feel Leo's small hand squeezing hers as if he sensed the storm inside her heart. She cleared her throat. "How long have you been sitting here?" she asked gently. The elderly man lifted his eyes, red and tired. "Since noon," he replied quietly. "The sun was still up then." Sarah's stomach twisted painfully. Noon? That meant they had sat through hours of waiting, watching strangers come and go, holding on to hope that slowly bled away. The old woman hugged her purse tightly to her chest as if it was the only thing grounding her to reality. "We didn't want to be a burden," she said softly. "We thought any minute now." Sarah swallowed hard. She glanced around the bus stop again. A few people stood nearby, dry under umbrellas, pretending not to hear. Not one person had stopped to help. The realization made Sarah's chest burn with quiet anger. Leo looked up at the old woman with wide eyes. "My mom says nobody should be alone in the rain," he said earnestly. Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't realized how much her words had shaped him. The old woman smiled weakly at Leo, tears slipping down her wrinkled cheeks. "You're a good boy," she whispered. Sarah knelt beside Leo and brushed rainwater from his face. "Sweetheart, go stand by the wall, okay?" she said softly. Leo nodded and obeyed, though he kept watching the couple. Sarah turned back to them, lowering her voice. "Do you have family nearby? Anyone else we can call?" The old man hesitated, his jaw tightening. "No," he said, "just our son." The old woman looked away, staring at the wet ground. "We didn't raise him to be like this," she added, almost pleading. "Something must have happened." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding but doubt. She had heard that excuse before. She had used it herself once, back when she still believed her husband would come back. Hope can make people endure the unbearable. A loud bus screeched to a stop nearby. People rushed forward, climbing inside. The doors closed, the bus pulled away. The elderly couple remained seated. That image struck Sarah deeply. Everyone else moving forward, them staying behind. She exhaled shakily. "You can't stay here all night," she said, firmer now. The old woman nodded faintly. "We know," she whispered, defeated. "We just don't know where to go." Sarah felt her heart pound louder. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small packet of biscuits, slightly crushed. "Here, please, eat something." The old man stared at the biscuits as if they were gold. His hands trembled as he took them. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. The old woman took a small bite, chewing slowly. Tears slipped down again, but this time they were mixed with relief. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket, a reminder notification. Rent due tomorrow. Her chest tightened. She looked at the couple, then at the dark street ahead. Her mind raced. If I helped them, how far would it go? A ride? Food? Shelter? Every option came with a cost she could barely afford. She stepped away slightly and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a second. Images flashed in her mind. Leo hungry, bills unpaid, nights crying silently into her pillow. But then another image appeared. Leo asking why Grandma was crying. Leo learning what kind of person his mother chose to be. Sarah opened her eyes. She walked back towards the bench, her posture straighter now. "Listen," she said, carefully. "I don't have much. I'm not rich. I'm barely managing." She paused, swallowing hard. "But I can't leave you here." The old woman's eyes widened. "Oh, no, dear, we don't want to trouble you," she said quickly. "We'll be fine." The old man nodded, though his body betrayed him as a shiver ran through his frame. "We've managed this long." Sarah shook her head firmly. "No, this isn't managing. This is surviving, and barely." Her voice trembled but didn't break. She pulled out her phone again, her fingers hesitating over the screen. "I'm going to call a taxi," she said, clear intent. "We'll figure out the rest later." The old woman gasped softly. "You don't have to." "I know," Sarah interrupted gently, "but I want to." The rain seemed to ease slightly, as if giving space for the moment. Leo walked back to Sarah's side and wrapped her arms around her leg. "Are they coming with us?" he asked quietly. Sarah rested her hand on his head. "Yes," she said, "for now." The elderly couple exchanged a look, fear, relief, disbelief, all tangled together. For the first time in hours, they stood up from the bench. And though Sarah didn't know it yet, this step away from the bus stop was a step towards a future none of them could have imagined. The taxi arrived with a loud splash, its tires cutting through a deep puddle near the curb. The yellow light on top blinked in the rain, almost like a small signal of hope in the dark street. Sarah raised her hand and waved it down, her heart pounding as if she were making an irreversible choice. The driver leaned out of the window, his expression tired and impatient. "Where to?" he asked sharply. Sarah hesitated. She hadn't fully planned this. Home? Her tiny apartment? Bringing strangers inside her personal space scared her. But leaving them behind scared her even more. "My place," she finally said. "It's not far." The driver looked at the elderly couple, then at Leo, then back at Sarah. He shrugged. "Fine, get in quickly, it's pouring." Sarah helped the old woman into the back seat first, holding her elbow carefully. The old woman winced slightly as she lowered herself. "I'm sorry to be such trouble," she whispered. "You're not," Sarah replied immediately. "Please don't say that." The old man struggled with the door, his hands shaking as he reached for the handle. Sarah rushed to assist him, her fingers brushing his cold skin. Leah watched closely, his small face serious. Inside the taxi, the windows fogged up almost instantly. The rain muffled the outside world as the car pulled away from the bus stop. The bench disappeared behind them, empty now, like it had swallowed hours of pain. For a few moments, no one spoke. The old woman clutched her purse, her knuckles white. The old man stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. Leo broke the silence. "Are you warm now?" he asked politely, leaning forward from his seat. The old woman smiled faintly. "A little, sweetheart, thank you." Her voice cracked, and she turned her face toward the window. Sarah watched them from the corner of her eye. Her stomach churned. Every bump in the road felt like another reminder that she was taking a risk she couldn't undo. The taxi stopped at a red light. The driver glanced at them in the rear-view mirror. "Family?" he asked casually. Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. The old woman spoke first. "She's an angel," she said softly. The driver's expression shifted slightly. He nodded and turned his eyes back to the road. As the car moved again, the old man finally spoke, his voice low and rough. "You didn't have to do this," he said to Sarah. "We would have figured something out." Sarah shook her head slowly. "No one should have to figure things out alone in the rain," she replied. The old man swallowed hard. His eyes glistened as he looked down at his hands. Humiliated gratitude. "Our own son didn't think that way." The words hung in the air. Sarah felt a sharp sting in her chest. She recognized that wound. It never really healed. The taxi turned onto a quieter street, lined with old buildings and dim streetlights. Sarah's neighborhood, not dangerous, but not comforting either. When the taxi stopped, Sarah felt another wave of doubt. This was it, no turning back. She paid the driver, wincing as the number on the meter flashed. The driver paused, then said quietly, "You're doing a good thing." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She opened the door and stepped out into the rain again. The old man followed slowly, nearly losing his balance. Sarah caught his arm quickly. "Easy," she said. They walked toward the building entrance. The lights flickered overhead, and the concrete steps were slick with rain. Inside the building, the hallway smelled of damp walls and old paint. The elderly couple looked around quietly. "I'm sorry it's small," Sarah said quickly, unlocking her door. "It's all I have." The old woman shook her head. "It's warm," she said, relief. "That's all that matters." Sarah flicked on the light. The apartment was simple. One couch, a small table, a tiny kitchen corner. She saw it through their eyes now. She wondered if they regretted coming. "Please sit," Sarah said, gesturing to the couch. She grabbed towels and handed them out. The old woman carefully removed her wet coat, her hands trembling. The old man leaned heavily on his cane as he sat. Sarah went to the kitchen and put water to boil, her movements fast and nervous. She needed something to do, something to keep her from thinking about tomorrow. As the kettle heated, she heard a soft sound behind her. The old man was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet, broken sobs that shook his shoulders. Sarah froze. She turned slowly. "I failed them," he said, his voice cracking. "I failed my wife. I failed my son." The old woman reached for his hand, tears streaming down her face. "No," she whispered. "We raised him with kindness. That still matters." Sarah felt tears slide down her own cheeks. She hadn't expected this weight, this depth of pain. She set the kettle down and walked over, placing a gentle hand on the old man's shoulder. "You didn't fail," she said softly. "Sometimes people make choices that have nothing to do with how they were raised." The old man looked up at her, eyes red and searching. For a moment, the room felt very small and very full. Leo stepped forward and wrapped his arms around the old woman. "It's okay," he said simply. The old woman broke down completely, pulling him into her chest. "Thank you," she cried. Sarah watched them, her heart aching and warming at the same time. She didn't know how long they would stay. She didn't know how she would manage. But in that moment, she knew one thing with certainty. Whatever happened next, none of them were alone anymore. The kettle finally clicked off with a sharp sound, breaking the heavy silence in the room. Steam rose into the air, filling the small apartment with warmth. Sarah poured hot water into chipped mugs, her hands still shaking slightly. She added tea bags, then hesitated before dropping in the last spoon of sugar she had left. "Here," she said, carrying the mugs carefully to the couch. "It's not much, but it'll help you warm up." The old woman accepted the cup with both hands, as if afraid it might disappear. "This is perfect," she said softly. She took a slow sip, closing her eyes. The old man nodded, wrapping his hands around the mug. "You've already done more than enough," he said quietly. Sarah forced a small smile. Inside, her thoughts were racing. She glanced at the clock on the wall, almost 9 p.m. Leo's bedtime had passed. Tomorrow was a school day. Everything felt off balance. "Leo," Sarah said gently, "why don't you change into your pajamas?" Leo nodded obediently but hesitated, looking back at the elderly couple. "Will they still be here?" he asked quietly. She crouched to his level. "Yes," she said softly. "They're safe." Leo smiled and walked toward the bedroom. As soon as he disappeared, Sarah's shoulders sagged slightly. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on her chest. She turned back to the couple, lowering her voice. Do you know where your son lives?" she asked carefully. The old woman's smile faded instantly. She shook her head. "He moved recently," she said. "It was temporary." The old man clenched his jaw. "He stopped answering our calls months ago," he admitted. "But when he finally contacted us yesterday, we thought—" His voice trailed off. Sarah felt a tight knot form in her stomach. "So you don't have his address?" she asked. Quiet confirmation. "No," the old man replied. Another silence settled in. Sarah sat down across from them, folding her hands together to stop them from shaking. She realized slowly and painfully that this situation might not end tonight. "I don't want to pry," Sarah said carefully, "but do you have anywhere else you can stay?" The old woman shook her head again, eyes filling with tears. "We sold our house last year," she whispered. Humiliated truth. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, pained empathy. Everything they had given up, everything they had trusted. "You can stay here tonight," Sarah said suddenly. The words surprised even her. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." The old woman gasped softly, shocked relief. "Oh, no, dear, we couldn't." "I insist," Sarah said firmly, though her voice trembled. "It's late, it's cold, and you need rest." The old man's eyes glistened. He slowly rose from the couch, leaning on his cane. "Then at least let me help you somehow," he said, dignified pride. "You're not useless. Please, just rest." Sarah grabbed extra blankets from the small closet, unfolding them carefully. The fabric was old but clean. She spread them across the couch, smoothing out the wrinkles. The old woman watched, tears streaming silently. "No one has done this for us in a long time," she whispered, broken thankfulness. Sarah paused with her hands on the blanket. "People forget," she said quietly. "Sad acceptance." The old man nodded slowly. Bitter agreement. From the bedroom, Leo's small voice called out, "Mom?" Sarah replied immediately, "I'm here." She turned back to the couple. "Please, get comfortable." The old woman lay down carefully, wincing as she adjusted her legs. Physical pain. The old man sat at the edge of the couch, shoulders slumped, total exhaustion. Sarah went to the bedroom and tucked Leo into bed. "Are they okay?" he whispered, quiet concern. "Yes," Sarah said, brushing his hair back. Soothing love. "They're sleeping here tonight." Leo smiled sleepily. Content trust. "I like them." Sarah felt her throat tighten. Emotional surge. "Me too," she whispered. After Leo drifted off, Sarah returned to the living room. Quiet steps. The lights were dim now. The old woman slept lightly, breathing uneven but calm. Fragile rest. The old man sat awake, staring at the floor. Sleepless worry. "Can't sleep?" Sarah asked softly. Concerned whisper. He shook his head, restless. "I keep thinking this is a dream," he said, "that we'll wake up back at that bus stop." Sarah sat down across from him, steady presence. "You're not there anymore," she said firmly, grounding assurance. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "Why did you help us?" he asked quietly. Searching question. Sarah didn't answer right away. Deep reflection. She stared at her hands, remembering every time she wished someone had helped her. Past longing. "Because I've been left before," she said finally. Raw honesty. The old man closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. Silent gratitude. The room fell quiet again, but this time it felt different. Soft peace. Outside, the rain slowed to a gentle patter. Calm after storm. Sarah leaned back against the wall, exhaustion washing over her. Deep fatigue. Tomorrow would bring questions, challenges, and consequences she couldn't yet imagine. Uncertain future. But tonight she had chosen compassion over fear. Quiet pride. And somewhere deep inside her, she felt that this night was only the beginning of something far bigger than all of them. Foreshadowing. Morning arrived quietly, slipping into the apartment through the thin curtains like a hesitant guest. Sarah woke with a sharp inhale, her body tense, as if she'd forgotten where she was for a second. Then she remembered. The bus stop, the rain, the elderly couple on her couch. She sat up slowly, listening. From the living room came the faint clink of a mug against a plate. Someone cleared their throat softly. Sarah's heart jumped. She slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway, bracing herself. The sight stopped her. The old man stood by the small kitchen counter, carefully stirring a pot of oatmeal with slow, deliberate movements. The old woman sat at the table, folding napkins neatly, her back straight despite the clear stiffness in her shoulders. Sarah blinked, surprised. "You didn't have to do this," she said quickly. "You're guests." The old man shook his head gently. "We couldn't just sit while you did everything," he said. It felt wrong. Sarah felt something warm spread through her chest. It had been so long since anyone tried to help her. From the bedroom, Leo's door creaked open. He stepped out, rubbing his eyes. When he saw the couple, his face lit up instantly. "Good morning," he said brightly. The old woman smiled, her whole face softening. "Good morning, sunshine," she replied. Sarah swallowed hard. The kitchen felt fuller somehow, warmer. They sat down together at the small table. The oatmeal was plain, but hot. Sarah watched as the old woman offered Leo the first spoonful. Leo accepted it happily. "This reminds me of when our son was little," the old woman said quietly. Her smile faded just a little. The old man's hand tightened around his mug. "He loved breakfast," he added softly. "Always asked for seconds." A silence fell. Sarah felt it pressing against her ribs. "I'm sorry," Sarah said gently. The old woman nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "Talking helps more than silence." Leo looked between them, sensing the mood shift. "My dad used to eat fast," he said suddenly. Sarah froze. The room went still. The old woman looked at Sarah carefully. "Is he not around?" she asked softly. Sarah exhaled slowly. "No," she said. The old man lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Sarah shrugged lightly, though her eyes burned. "You learn to live with it." But the old woman reached across the table and gently touched Sarah's hand. "No one should have to," she said firmly. That simple sentence cracked something open inside Sarah. She quickly stood up and began rinsing dishes, turning her back. "I need to get Leo ready for school," she said. As she helped Leo pack his bag, her thoughts raced. How long could they stay? What would happen next? What if this kindness backfired? At the door, Leo hugged the old woman tightly. "Bye," he said happily. "Don't leave." The words landed heavily. The old woman's lips trembled. "We won't," she promised. After Leo left for school, the apartment felt too quiet. Sarah sat across from the couple again, hands folded tightly. "We need to talk," she said firmly. They nodded together. "I can't promise anything long-term," she continued, "but I'll help you figure out what to do next." The old man straightened slightly. "That's more than enough," he said. The old woman hesitated, then reached into her purse. "What's this?" Sarah asked cautiously. "Our savings," the old woman said quietly. "No," Sarah said firmly. "I didn't help you for money." The old man's eyes filled with tears. "That's what makes this so hard to accept," he said. Sarah leaned back, exhaling. "Let's just take today one step at a time." A sudden knock echoed through the apartment. All three froze. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. She stood slowly and walked to the door. Another knock, firmer this time. She opened the door a few inches. A stranger stood outside. Well-dressed, clean shoes, sharp eyes. "I'm looking for an elderly couple," the man said. Behind Sarah, the old woman gasped. The old man stood abruptly, gripping his cane. The moment stretched thin. Sarah didn't know yet that this knock would mark the turning point of everything. Sarah's hand tightened on the edge of the door as the stranger waited outside, his expression calm but unreadable. The hallway light reflected off his polished shoes, making him look painfully out of place in the worn apartment building. "Yes?" Sarah asked carefully. "I'm Daniel," the man said, offering a brief nod. "I'm looking for Mr. and Mrs. Harris." His eyes flicked past Sarah, scanning the room behind her. "Their son contacted me." At the mention of son, the air inside the apartment seemed to freeze. The old woman clutched the back of the chair, her fingers trembling. He did?" she whispered, unsteady hope. The old man's jaw tightened, his expression rigid with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "After all this time?" he said sharply. Sarah felt her pulse race, her hands clenching at her sides. She stepped slightly in front of the doorway, instinctively protective. "Who exactly are you?" she asked, her voice firm. Daniel exhaled slowly, as if choosing his words. "I'm a legal representative," he said. "Their son was worried when they didn't return last night." The old man let out a short, humorless laugh, bitterness tinging his voice. "Worried," he repeated, scoffing. We left us at a bus stop for 6 hours." Daniel's expression faltered for just a moment, surprise flickering in his eyes. "That's not what I was told." The old woman stepped forward cautiously, her voice low and hollow. "He said he would come back," she said softly, hurt and guilty intertwined. We waited. A heavy silence settled between them. Daniel glanced down, rubbing his jaw. "I see," he said quietly. "May I come in? We should talk." Sarah hesitated, her instincts screaming. She looked at the couple. The old man nodded slightly. Sarah stepped aside and opened the door fully. Daniel entered, taking in the small apartment with careful eyes. He noticed the blankets on the couch, the half-finished breakfast, the school bag by the door. "You stayed here?" he asked the couple. The old woman nodded, her voice subdued. "This kind woman helped us," she said, gesturing toward Sarah. Daniel turned to Sarah, surprise flickering across his face. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "That couldn't have been easy." Sarah folded her arms. "They needed help," she replied, her voice plain. Daniel cleared his throat. "Your son is complicated," he said to the couple, her voice choosy, it does appear. "He panicked after an argument. He didn't intend for things to go this far." The old man slammed his cane lightly against the floor, passion simmering in his voice. "Intentions don't matter when you abandon your parents," he said, angrily controlled. The old woman reached for her husband's arm, her hands trembling. "We just want to understand," she said, her voice fragile with uncertainty. Daniel nodded. "He wants to see you," he said. "He's outside." The words landed hard. Sarah's eyes widened. "Outside?" she repeated, her voice tight. Before anyone could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. A shadow appeared at the door. Then he stepped inside. The son looked younger than Sarah expected, maybe in his late 30s. His clothes were expensive but wrinkled, his eyes red and restless. The moment he saw his parents, he froze. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice broken. The old woman gasped, her breath shaken. Tears filled her eyes instantly. "Why?" she asked softly, causing her to nod uncontrollably. The son swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping. "I messed up," he said, his voice hoarse with regret. "I didn't think. I panicked." The old man stared at him, his eyes burning with controlled fury. "You left us in the rain," he said, his voice steel cold. The son nodded repeatedly, desperately trying to explain himself. I know. I thought you'd take a cab. I thought—" "You thought wrong," the old man cut in, his voice angry. Sarah stood quietly near the wall, her heart pounding, intensely aware of everything that was happening around them. She watched the family unravel in front of her, feeling like an intruder in something deeply personal. The son finally noticed Sarah, his face confused and curious. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice sharp. "I'm the one who didn't leave them," Sarah said simply. The words hit their mark. The son looked at her, shame washing over his face. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The old woman wiped her tears, her hands trembling. "We trusted you," she said to her son, her voice filled with pain. "We gave up everything to be near you." The son dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I know," he sobbed. "I don't deserve forgiveness." The old man remained standing, rigid. He looked at his son, his eyes filled with a pain that went beyond anger. "No," he said, quietly, his voice final. Daniel cleared his throat again, uneasy in the overwhelming emotion filling the room. "There are other matters we need to discuss," he said carefully. The old man turned toward him, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What matters?" Daniel took a breath, his voice low and steady. "Your parents recently transferred certain assets," he said. "Property, accounts, trust arrangements." Sarah felt a chill crawl up her spine. The son looked up sharply, his face etched with alarm. "What are you talking about?" The old man's voice was calm but firm. "We wanted to see what kind of man you had become," he said, his voice quiet. "And now we know." The room fell into stunned silence. The son's face drained of color. "You tested me?" he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. The old woman nodded sadly. "We hoped you would pass." Sarah's breath caught, suddenly understanding everything. This wasn't just abandonment, it was a reckoning, a turning point. Daniel looked at Sarah again, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And you," he said carefully, "you stepped in when no one else did." Sarah stiffened. "I didn't do it for anything," she said quickly, her voice firm. The old man turned to her, his expression softening for the first time. "We know," he said, his voice gentle. The son stared at Sarah, realization dawning on his face. He had failed where a stranger had succeeded. Outside, traffic passed as usual, unaware of the lives colliding inside that small apartment. Sarah felt it then, a subtle shift in the air. Something important was unfolding, something that would soon demand consequences and choices from everyone in the room. And she knew, deep in her bones, that nothing would go back to the way it was before. The silence after the old man's words felt heavy enough to press against the walls. No one moved. No one breathed loudly. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed too sharp in the room. The son stared at his parents, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words that refused to come. His hands trembled in his lap. You tested me?" he repeated, his voice cracking under the weight of the realization. The old woman looked at him with eyes full of sorrow rather than anger. "We didn't want to," she said softly, "but we needed to know if we still mattered to you." The son shook his head slowly, as if trying to wake from a nightmare. "That's not fair," he said weakly, defensive desperation. "You can't just—" "You left us," the old man interrupted, his voice calm but devastatingly firm. The son flinched. Sarah stood quietly near the doorway, her heart pounding. She felt the urge to step back, to disappear, but something rooted her in place. This wasn't just their story anymore, she was part of it now too. Daniel shifted his weight uneasily. He presented a professional discomfort. "Perhaps we should all sit," he suggested, cautious mediation. "Emotions are running high." No one listened. The son pushed himself up from the chair and took a shaky step toward his parents. "I was scared," he said, his voice rising, raw confession. "Everything felt like it was slipping out of control. The business, the pressure, the expectations." "And so you discarded us?" the old man asked quietly, cutting calm. The son froze. "That's what you did," the old man continued, steady judgment. "You discarded us when we were inconvenient." The old woman covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now. "I kept telling myself you'd come back," she whispered, broken hope. "Every minute felt longer than the last." The son's knees buckled slightly. He reached for the back of the chair to steady himself. "I'm sorry," he choked, sobbing apology. The old man looked at him for a long moment, measured silence. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but no less heavy, low finality. "You can't fix it with words," he said, somber truth. "Only with who you choose to be from now on." Daniel cleared his throat again, stepping forward slightly. "For clarity," he said carefully, legal tone, "your parents placed their assets into a discretionary trust. Decisions about access depend on certain conditions." The son's head snapped up. "What conditions?" he asked, panicked edge. Daniel hesitated, glancing at the old man, seeking consent. The old man nodded once. calm authorization. Character, Daniel said plainly, blunt truth. Demonstrated responsibility, compassion. The son let out a short, hollow laugh. "And I failed," he said, defeated acceptance. "Yes," the old man replied, unflinching honesty. The word echoed in the room, heavy finality. Sarah felt a strange tightening in her chest, emotional conflict. She didn't feel satisfaction, she didn't feel revenge, only sadness, for all of them. The old woman wiped her face with trembling fingers, exhausted sorrow. "We didn't want to punish you," she said, pleading softness. The son looked at her, truly looking this time, painful awareness. "And instead," he whispered, regret, "I showed you the worst of me." "Yes," she said quietly, truthful sadness. Another silence settled in, heavier than the first, weighted pause. Leo's small backpack rested by the door, forgotten. Sarah's eyes drifted to it, then back to the broken family before her, sobering contrast. "You know," Sarah said suddenly, her voice calm but steady, quiet courage, "people don't always fail because they're bad." All eyes turned to her. "Sometimes they fail because they're afraid," she continued, measured empathy. "But fear doesn't excuse the damage it causes." The son nodded slowly, tears spilling down his cheeks, humiliated acceptance. "I was afraid," he admitted, raw confession, "and I hurt the people who loved me most." The old man regarded Sarah with a thoughtful expression, respectful consideration. "You speak from experience," he said, observant calm. Sarah swallowed hard, exposed vulnerability. "Yes," she replied simply, honesty. Daniel glanced between them, sensing the shift in the room, tactical awareness. "There is another matter," he said, hesitant disclosure. "Your parents asked me to observe." The son stiffened again, alerted fear. Daniel turned fully toward Sarah, direct focus. "They asked me to take note of the person who helped them, why and how." Sarah felt her pulse spike, sudden unease. "I didn't do anything special," she said quickly, deflecting modesty. "I just did what anyone should." The old woman smiled faintly through her tears, tender gratitude. "That's exactly what makes it special," she said, soft affection. The son looked at Sarah with something new in his eyes, not just shame, but humility, shifting perception. "You didn't owe them anything," he said, realization. "I did." Sarah met his gaze steadily, firm composure. "Then learn from that," she said, quiet challenge. The old man took a slow breath, measured decision. "We are not cutting you off forever," he said to his son, calm declaration, "but things will change." The son straightened slightly, attentive hope. "How?" he asked, cautious anticipation. "You will earn back trust," the old man replied, steady resolve. "Through action, through consistency." The old woman nodded, gentle agreement. "And through kindness," she added softly, pleading emphasis. The son nodded repeatedly, tears still falling, eager remorse. "I will," he promised, desperate commitment. Daniel checked his watch discreetly, professional transition. "I'll arrange temporary accommodations, and we'll reconvene soon." The old man raised a hand, controlled pause. "Not yet," he said, firm intent. He turned to Sarah. "You opened your home to us," he said, deep gratitude. "You listened when we were invisible." Sarah felt her throat tighten, emotional impact. "Anyone would have—" "No," the old man interrupted, gently, quiet certainty. "They didn't." The truth settled heavily, sobering reality. The son looked down at the floor, ashamed silence. He finally understood that what he had lost was not just money or trust, but dignity, painful reckoning. Sarah sensed the turning point clearly now, crystal awareness. This was no longer about abandonment alone. It was about accountability.
and the next choice each of them made would decide who they became next. Imminent consequence.
Daniel adjusted his tie and took a slow breath, as if bracing himself for what he was about to say. The tension in the room had shifted, less explosive, more fragile, like cracked glass that could shatter with one wrong word. "There is a reason I was asked to observe everything closely," Daniel said. "Not just the son's actions, but yours as well." He looked directly at Sarah. Sarah stiffened, her shoulders drawing back instinctively. "I told you," she said quietly, "I didn't help them expecting anything." "We know," the old man replied before Daniel could speak. "That's exactly why this matters." The son frowned, confused. "Matters how?" he asked. Daniel reached into his briefcase and removed a thin folder, placing it gently on the table. The sound of paper against wood felt unnaturally loud. "Mr. and Mrs. Harris," Daniel began, "are not struggling financially." The son's head snapped up. "What?" he blurted. The old woman closed her eyes briefly. The old man remained still, his hands folded calmly. "We sold our home," the old woman said softly, "but not because we had to." The son stood abruptly. "You told me you needed help," he said, accusing confusion. "You said things were tight." "We wanted to see who you were without money involved," the old man replied, calm truth. "We wanted to know if love alone was enough." The son's face flushed with shame. He looked away, unable to meet their eyes. Daniel opened the folder. "Mr. and Mrs. Harris," Daniel began, "are not struggling financially. Property, investments, accounts, enough to live comfortably for the rest of their lives." Sarah's breath caught. She hadn't expected this, not at all. "And yet," Daniel continued, "they were left alone at a bus stop." The son's shoulders slumped. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You didn't ask," the old man replied. The words landed with finality. Daniel closed the folder halfway, then turned his attention fully to Sarah. "Which brings us to you." Sarah felt her pulse spike. "Me?" she asked, uneasy confusion. "Yes," Daniel said. "Your actions last night and today were documented." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I don't want to be part of anything legal," she said quickly. "I just helped them." "And that," the old woman said gently, "is why you are." The old man nodded slowly. "We asked Daniel to observe kindness without incentive," he said, "to see who would act when there was nothing to gain." Sarah shook her head. "There was no test," she said firmly. "People shouldn't need one." The old man smiled faintly. "You're right," he said, "but the world doesn't always agree." The son looked between them, confusion mixing with dread. "What does this have to do with her?" he asked. Daniel straightened. "Your parents intend to revise their estate planning," he said, "based on demonstrated character." The son went pale. "You're cutting me out," he said, panicked assumption. "No," the old woman said softly. "We are redefining what legacy means." Daniel slid a single document out of the folder and placed it in front of Sarah. "This is a letter," Daniel said, "not a contract, not yet." Sarah stared at it, her hands frozen in her lap. "I don't understand," she whispered. The old man leaned forward slightly. "You gave us shelter," he said. "You gave us dignity when we had none." The old woman nodded, tears shining again. "You reminded us what family feels like." Sarah's eyes filled despite her effort to hold back tears. "I just didn't want you to be alone," she said, trembling with honesty. "And that," the old man replied, "is exactly why we want to help you." The son shook his head slowly. "You're rewarding her," he said, bitter understanding. "Yes," the old man said plainly. The word echoed like a gavel strike. Sarah pushed the document back across the table. "I can't accept anything," she said, strained control. "I have my son. I have my life. I didn't do this for money." Daniel watched her carefully. "The letter doesn't offer money," he said. Sarah blinked. "Then what does it offer?" The old woman took Sarah's hand gently. "Opportunity," she said. "Security. A future where kindness isn't punished." Sarah's breath shook. "I don't need saving," she said, protective pride. The old man smiled kindly. "No," he agreed, "but your son deserves a world where your mother's goodness doesn't cost her everything." The words cut deep. Sarah thought of Leo, of unpaid bills, of constant fear. She looked down, struggling. The son finally spoke again, his voice quieter now. "If you accept," he said to Sarah, "it might remind me of what I failed to be." Sarah looked at him, seeing not an enemy but a broken man. "This isn't about teaching you a lesson," she said, calm clarity. "It's about doing better." The old man nodded. "Exactly." Daniel checked his notes. "Nothing needs to be decided today," he said, reassuring formality. "But the offer stands." Sarah finally reached for the letter, her fingers trembling as she picked it up. She didn't open it yet, she just held it, feeling its weight. "I need time," she said quietly. "Of course," the old woman replied. The son exhaled shakily. He looked at his parents, then at Sarah. For the first time, he understood that wealth without character meant nothing. Outside, sunlight filtered through the clouds for the first time since the storm. The room felt different now, not lighter, but clearer. Sarah didn't know what choice she would make, but she knew one thing with certainty. Kindness had opened a door she never expected, and once opened, nothing in her life would ever be small again. The apartment felt quieter after Daniel closed his briefcase, as if the walls themselves were listening. Sarah sat with the unopened letter resting in her hands, her fingers gripping the edges too tightly. The paper felt heavier than it should have, weighted with possibilities she wasn't sure she was ready to face. "I think I should go," the son said, suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice lacked its earlier defensiveness. Now it sounded small, uncertain. The old woman looked up at him, eyes still red but calmer. "Are you leaving again?" she asked softly. The son flinched. "No," he said quickly. "I mean, I'll give you space. I don't want to force myself where I'm not welcome." The old man studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "That's a start," he said. The son swallowed hard. He turned to Sarah, hesitating. "I owe you more than I can say," he said quietly. "You did what I didn't have the courage to do." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Don't thank me," she replied. "Show up for them. That's what matters." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I will." As the door closed behind him, the room exhaled. The old woman let out a shaky breath she seemed to have been holding all morning. "I still love him," she whispered. The old man reached for her hand. "Love doesn't disappear," he said quietly, "but trust has to be rebuilt." Sarah listened, her heart aching. She thought of Leo's father, of the silence that followed his leaving. Some wounds healed, others simply learned how to live inside you. Daniel checked his watch. "I'll step out as well," he said. When the door shut again, only the three of them remained. The old woman turned toward Sarah, her expression gentle but serious. "May I ask you something?" she said. Sarah nodded. "Why did you really stop?" the old woman asked, searchingly. Sarah looked down at her hands. She took a slow breath. "Because my son was watching," she said finally. "And because I know what it feels like to wait for someone who never comes." The old woman's eyes filled instantly. "We saw that in you," she whispered. The old man leaned back slightly, studying Sarah with thoughtful calm. "You didn't hesitate," he said. Sarah gave a small, tired smile. I did hesitate, she admitted. I was just more afraid of walking away. A knock came at the door, lighter this time. Sarah's heart jumped again. But when she opened it, she found Leo's teacher standing there, holding his backpack. "I'm sorry," the teacher said. "Leo forgot his lunch." Leo peeked out from behind her leg, smiling sheepishly. "Oops." Sarah laughed softly, the sound unexpected but real. "Come here," she said, pulling him into a hug. The old woman watched the moment with shining eyes. "He's wonderful," she said. "He is," Sarah replied. As Leo sat at the table eating, chatting happily about school, the old man cleared his throat. "We've made a decision," he said. Sarah's shoulders tensed slightly. "We don't want to be a burden," the old woman added, "but we would like to stay close, to help, to be useful." Sarah frowned gently. "You don't owe me anything," she said. The old man shook his head. "This isn't about owing," he said. "It's about belonging." The word hung in the air. "We've been alone," the old woman continued, "and you welcomed us like family." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "I don't know how that would work," she admitted. "My life is small." The old man smiled kindly. "Small lives often have the biggest hearts," he said. Leo looked up from his cereal. "Does that mean you're my grandparents now?" he asked, hopefully. The old woman laughed through tears. "If you'll have us," she said tenderly. Leo grinned widely. "Okay." Sarah covered her mouth, overwhelmed. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't imagined it. The old man stood slowly, extending his hand to Sarah. "Whatever you decide about the letter," he said, "know this, we are grateful beyond words." Sarah took his hand, her grip firm but trembling. "I don't know what the future looks like," she said, "but I know I don't want to face it alone anymore." The old woman nodded, eyes shining. "Neither do we." Outside, the city moved on as usual. Inside the small apartment, something rare was taking shape. Not a deal, not a reward, but a family, built not by blood or money, but the simple choice to stop and care. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the apartment curtains, casting a warm, golden glow across the living room. Sarah sat on the edge of the couch, still holding the letter from the Harris couple. Its weight seemed heavier now, not because of paper or ink, but because of the decisions it represented. She glanced at Leo, who was sprawled on the floor with crayons and a sketch pad. His drawings were wild, colorful, and chaotic, much like the morning's events had been, but he hummed happily as he worked. Watching him, Sarah felt her chest tighten with a mix of love, exhaustion, and hope. The old woman, Mrs. Harris, moved carefully around the apartment, tidying up small things, folding a blanket, straightening the cushions. Her movements were deliberate but unhurried, as if she were learning the rhythm of someone else's home while contributing her own. Mr. Harris, on the other hand, was seated at the small dining table, quietly reviewing a notepad filled with scribbles. Every so often he looked up, catching Sarah's gaze with a nod or a small smile. Despite his age and the morning's stress, there was a quiet strength about him now, a calm authority that hadn't been there at the bus stop. Sarah finally broke the silence, holding up the letter. I need to make a choice," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "This isn't just about me. It's about Leo, about all of us." Mrs. Harris approached and placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Take your time," she said, her voice kind but firm. "There's no rush. We've learned patience, haven't we?" Sarah smiled faintly, touched by the words. "Patience, yes," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Leo looked up, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Mom, Does this mean we're going to have more fun stuff?" His innocence broke the tension in the room. Sarah laughed softly, ruffling his hair. "Maybe," she said, her mind still heavy with thoughts of responsibility and change. The son of the couple, who had been quietly standing near the doorway, finally spoke. I understand if you don't want to accept it," he said softly. "I'd probably feel the same way." Sarah looked at him, seeing not the man who abandoned his parents, but someone who had begun to recognize his mistakes. "It's not about accepting or rejecting," she said carefully. "It's about recognizing what's right, and who's been kind when it mattered most." The son nodded slowly, swallowing hard. He understood now that the true lesson wasn't about wealth, influence, or even family hierarchy. It was about empathy, about courage, about taking action when others faltered. Daniel, who had been quietly observing in the corner, cleared his throat. "Whatever decision is made, we can formalize it properly. There's no rush. This is about long-term trust and integrity." Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of relief. Even the option of delay, of thinking carefully, was comforting. She glanced down at the letter again, weighing it in her hands. Mrs. Harris sat beside her, taking a deep breath. "Sarah," she said softly, "we've been alone a long time, and in your actions you reminded us that kindness exists, that people still care." Sarah's throat tightened. "I didn't do it for recognition," she said humbly. I couldn't leave you there. It's not about money or letters or anything like that." Mr. Harris joined them, leaning on his cane slightly. "It's precisely why we chose you," he said, sincerely. "You showed character where others, our own son, momentarily failed. You acted not because it benefited you, but because it was right. That matters more than anything." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling. "I don't know if I deserve this," she whispered. The old woman smiled, placing her hand over Sarah's. "Deserving has nothing to do with it," she said gently. "The world needs more people like you, and now we have the chance to make sure you're protected, not just admired for what you do." Sarah looked at Leo, who was watching the exchange curiously. His small hand reached for hers, innocent trust, reminding her why she had always done her best, why she had stood at the bus stop in the rain without hesitation. For the first time that day, Sarah felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't about wealth, letters, or being rewarded. It was about creating a space where kindness was honored and trust was rebuilt. A space where her son could grow up surrounded by examples of compassion and courage. Finally, she opened the letter, unfolding it carefully. The words inside were simple but profound, an offer of partnership, support, and the assurance that her actions would be recognized in ways that didn't compromise her dignity or independence. She looked at the couple, tears spilling freely now. "I accept," she said softly. "Not for me, not for recognition, but because it feels right." The old man's eyes softened, and a small, genuine smile appeared. "Then it is settled," he said, confidently. The old woman laughed lightly through her tears. "Welcome to our little family," she said, heartwarmingly. Leo jumped up, running toward the couch to hug Sarah and the Harris couple at the same time. "We're all together," he exclaimed, innocent delight. Sarah hugged him back, feeling the warmth of their connection envelop her. She realized in that moment that life was messy, complicated, and unpredictable, but when people chose kindness, even the smallest act could change everything. The son of the couple approached cautiously, standing beside them. I want to try," he said, voice low but sincere. "It's not about being perfect," he said gently. "It's about showing up, consistently, with integrity." The son exhaled, relief washing over him. For the first time in months, he felt like there was a path forward, not just to reconciliation with his parents, but to becoming a man worthy of their trust. Sarah watched the scene, a quiet smile forming on her face. She understood now that her decision had done more than protect her son or herself. It had sparked a ripple of change across all their lives. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the room, the small apartment was filled with laughter, conversation, and the simple, steady rhythm of shared humanity. Sarah leaned back, exhausted but happy, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't known in years. She knew challenges would come, as they always did, but she also knew that kindness, courage, and love would guide them through. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt truly at home, not just in a physical space, but in the knowledge that choices, when made from the heart, could change the world. And in that moment, surrounded by her son, the Harris couple, and the quiet hum of life continuing outside, she realized the greatest lesson of all, that the simple act of stopping to help someone in need could lead to a lifetime of unimaginable transformation. The apartment, once cold and quiet, now felt alive. With each shared laugh, each glance of understanding, each small act of care, a new chapter had begun. A chapter built not on wealth, status, or obligation, but on the enduring power of human kindness. Sarah looked down at Leo, then at the Harris couple, then at the letter in her hands. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "This is only the beginning," and for the first time she truly believed it.